Hello, today we are doing lesson 5.5c. We're going to start looking at perpendicular lines. We focused a lot on parallel lines. Parallel lines have the same slope, but today we're going to look at perpendicular lines. So perpendicular lines have slopes that are what are called opposite reciprocals, and we talked about this in class a little bit. Opposite meaning one of the slopes is positive and the other is negative, and reciprocal meaning our fraction is flipped. So for example, this first one here, we have a slope of 2 over 1, and our opposite reciprocal slope is negative 1 over 2. So instead of positive, it's negative. Instead of 2 over 1, it's 1 over 2. And same thing here. This first one has a negative slope, so the second one has to be positive. Instead of 2 over 3, they took the reciprocal or flipped it, 3 over 2. So we're going to practice just writing slopes that are parallel, meaning it's the same slope, and then perpendicular, meaning our slopes are opposite reciprocals. Oops, it's hard to fit that in. Reciprocal. So if our slope is 4, a parallel slope is also 4. If we want to make it a fraction 4 over 1, we can. So then the opposite reciprocal, instead of positive slope, we'll have a negative slope. Instead of 4 over 1, our slope would be 1 over 4. So the perpendicular slope would be negative 1/4. Reminder that perpendicular lines are lines that cross at right angles, so their slopes are opposite reciprocals. Next, we have the slope negative 2 over 5. If it's parallel, our slope's the same. If it's perpendicular opposite, instead of negative, it's a positive. Instead of 2 over 5, we have 5 over 2. Next, our slope is negative 6. Parallel slope is the same, but perpendicular, instead of negative, it's positive. Instead of 6 over 1, we have 1 over 6. Then parallel slope to 7 over 2 is 7 over 2. And then opposite reciprocal, instead of positive, negative. Instead of 7 over 2, we want 2 over 7. Next, we have 1/4. Parallel lines are the same, 1/4. Perpendicular, instead of positive, we want negative. Instead of 1 over 4, we want 4 over 1. So that is really just negative 4. The last one we have here, 0.75. Well, that's not a fraction. So if it's not a fraction, we could write it as a fraction. This is really 75 hundredths, or 75 out of 100. Many of you also know this as 3/4. Either one would do. A simplified version would be the best. Think of 75 cents. Well, that's 3/4 of a dollar. It's 3/4, right? So parallel would also be 3/4. And opposite reciprocal, we'd have negative. Instead of 3 over 4, we'd have 4 over 3. All right, so we're going to graph a couple lines. We need to solve for y so that we can graph them if they're not already solved for y. So this one, we just need to move our x's over to the other side. I'm going to add 6x. So we end up with y equals 6x and then minus 1. So our slope is 6 and 6 over 1, and b is negative 1, because this is in the form y equals mx plus b. Next, we need to distribute this. Negative 1/6 times x, just put them together, negative 1/6 x. Negative 1/6 times 6. 6 is really 6 over 1 as a fraction. So negative 1 times 6 is negative 6. 6 times 1 is 6. So this really gives us a negative 1. If you needed to draw your box to multiply negative 1/6 times x plus 6, you should get the same answer up here. So we have y minus 2 equals negative 1/6 x minus 1. And we want y by itself, so we need to add 2 to both sides. And we have y equals negative 1/6 x. Negative 1 plus 2, there's more positives now, only 1 extra positive. So our slope m is negative 1/6, and our b is 1. To make sure we did this correctly, perpendicular lines have slopes that are opposite signs and reciprocals. So let's take a look. Are our slopes opposite signs, positive, negative? And yes, they are reciprocal, 6 over 1 1 over 6. So we need to graph these two lines. First one begins at -1, and we have a slope of rise 6, run 1, so up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and over 1, or down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and over 1. The other line begins right here at +1, and our slope is -1, 6, so down 1 and 6 to the right, or up 1 and 6 to the left. As you can see, these form right angles. This little square here means it's a right angle. You could put a piece of paper in this corner and it would match up perfectly. Let's flip over to the back side. A couple more we need to graph to make sure that our equations are perpendicular. We need to solve this one for y. We just need to subtract 3. So we have y by itself. We have y equals 2 over 3x minus 3. This is now in the form y equals mx plus b. So we have our slope is 2/3 and b is -3. And the opposite of multiplying by 4 is dividing by 4. So we have y equals a negative and 6 over 4. If we simplify that, we can divide by 2. That gives us 3 over 2. And then plus 8 divided by 4. Oops, forgot the x. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So this one is also now in the form y equals mx plus b. M is -3 over 2, and b is 2. If you look at our slopes, they are opposite reciprocals, so we know we did this correctly. Move this just a little bit so I can see the rest of my graph. So the first line here that I have in blue, we're beginning at -3, and our slope is rise 2, run 3, up 2, 3 to the right. Rise over run. And the opposite of up and right is down 2 and 3 to the left. Down 2, 3 to the left. The second line, we're beginning over here at 2, +2, and our slope is down 3, 2 to the right. Down 3, 2 to the right. Or the opposite of down and right would be up and left. And as you can see, those form right angles as well. If I put a piece of paper with a nice straight corner in, or edge on the corner, it would fit in there perfectly. Alright, last question we're going to do together. First one, we need to solve for y. So we need to move the x's over to the other side, so the opposite of subtracting is adding. Add 6x to both sides. So we have 2y equals 6x minus 4. That is a negative there. And the opposite of multiply is divide. Divide everything by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, so we have y equals 3x minus 2. So as our slope, make sure you write it as a fraction, 3 over 1. This other one is already solved for y. So b is -7 and m is -1/3. Look at your slopes. Are they opposite reciprocals, positive, negative, and flipped? Yes, they are. So we can graph them. First one begins at -2, and our slope is rise 3 over 1, rise 3 over 1, +1 is to the right, or down and left. And then we begin the second one at -7, way at the bottom there, and our slope is down 1 and 3 to the right. Well, we can't go down and right, so we can only go up and left. Up 1, 3 to the left. And you know this one's really far down in the bottom of the graph, but it does form a right angle. Their slopes are opposite reciprocals. Alright, your homework is very similar to this. Simply solve each equation and graph it. And then it says write another equation that would be perpendicular to line B. So line B is always going to be the second one. Write another equation that's perpendicular in the form y equals mx plus b. So slope is most important.